in another dimension, doomed to walk this earth forever. You are about to see and hear some very compelling testimony that could convince and chill you into belief. A graveyard, the place where the deathly gathering of silent souls might be seen to stir unexpectedly. A body disappearing from a dank tomb, or a dark vampire figure swishing evilly in search of victims, give shiver and substance to the horror film genre. In reality, ghostly phenomena are rarely reported haunting the tombstones of lonely graveyards. They prefer to be closer to human habitation, and are even compelled towards former social habits. This public house, built in the 1830s as a coaching inn and situated between two busy roads, doesn't seem an appropriate setting for a haunting, but appearances can be deceptive. Landlord Roy Gates relates some strange experiences.
Must be about 22 years ago, soon after I came in. I kept waking up in the morning, early, and I couldn't understand what it was all about. And one day, I caught it, and it was the front gate. Kept opening and shutting, dead on 5 o'clock in the morning, every morning. And I tried to catch it, but it wouldn't happen. I still haven't caught it to this day, and it still does it.
Soon, however, there were other strange happenings.
Well, the gas fire was switched off one day. I turned it on first thing in the morning. Staff was here. Nobody had came in at all. And I popped down to the bank to get some change. I wasn't gone more than 10 minutes. And bar staff came up to me when I came back and said, did you switch that fire on? I said, yes, definitely. So it's not on now. And, tell you what, it switched off. There hadn't been a soul in the place at all. Most peculiar. Because then we had the incident of the barrels being kicked around down in the cellar late at night. That was quite hairy. One of my staff was here visiting a friend upstairs, and we'd finished and cleared up and gone home. And all of a sudden the barrels started to be kicked around in the cellar, bang, crashing all over the place. And they were so petrified they daren't come down and go home, so they had to stay there all night and put up with it, which was rather, they weren't very happy about it, but I thought it was quite amusing. I've always called it a friendly ghost. You know, it's a playful ghost rather than aggravation one, you know. So it hasn't bothered me at all. The only weird experience I had was I did try and, shall we say, catch it one night. I slept down here in the bar. And I was woken up about 3-4 o'clock in the morning by this freezing cold and wind, you know, typical ghost and ghoulie situation, you know, and I thought, blimey, I don't like this. And I didn't see anything or nothing happen. It was just something came and went. And there were no windows open or anything like that to create a draft. And that was the only sort of strange experience I've come across. But it doesn't bother me. Well, we tried to trace back from to find out who the spirit is or what it is. We had no success really at all. We can only assume it was somebody that was probably done in here many years ago. And can't find anything at all.
Or maybe there's another explanation. In 1860, landlord George Faulkner's wife gave birth to a son. Tragically, 2 years later, George died aged 27. His wife remarried, moving away and leaving her young son in the care of her sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth raised the boy until his emigration to Australia, where he married and had a family of his own. So, could it be the spirit of George Faulkner still searching for his wife and son? Years ago, this farmhouse was built on the site of a Roman battleground and subsequently owned by generations of the same family. The last surviving member died last year, and now it's occupied by the Coleman family. The ghostly activities in and around the house are often experienced by Mrs. Coleman, a psychic, who is also protected by a guardian angel.
How it started was a friend of mine and her husband used to do the Ouija boards, and I didn't at that time. And remember, the husband ran round to fetch me to go back to the house because there was someone that they had contacted wanted to speak to me. So I thought it was a joke, you know. And I went round, and they started the Ouija again and said that I was there, and that whoever wanted to speak to me, you know, could speak to me. And that's when they spelled out the name. This was Pedro, and he was here to sort of look after me.
Having fed her animals, Bella was returning alone to the farmhouse when her attention was caught by a shadowy figure in one of the stables, but assumed it was the horse's owner. She then noticed, however, the stable's tenant just entering the courtyard. Over the years, the farmhouse had fallen into a sad state of disrepair. So as soon as they moved in, the Colemans quickly began to rectify this. This photograph, taken at the time, revealed something that hadn't been noticed before. Close inspection revealed the ghostly image of a small dog on the newly decorated wall. Obviously, four-legged creatures as well as two choose to haunt this farm. Professional medium Francile Rosser came to offer thoughts on what was happening at the farm.
As I came through the house into the kitchen area, then I could feel and see in what I call dimension was an actual spiritual person, which was a man, I would say about 5'5", a little bit on the stocky side.
And there was one particular night, I was just sitting here watching a film. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning anyway, and I suddenly felt something over in this corner here, and I just went cold and my hair stood up, you know, like on ends, and I looked over and I just thought I saw a man sitting on the armchair there, and I just got a bit frightened, and I just quickly switched the television off and ran upstairs to bed. And from that night, I've never sat up on my own.
Francille also extended general advice on how to deal with spiritual manifestations.
Because we cannot understand ourselves, not fully, so we don't expect to understand another person. But if we see in something that can really confuse our minds because it is not physical, but is something that is actually as a life force, which you see actually moves, can communicate, whatever form it may be, then I advise that person, if they have this experience around them, to accept it as part of an energy that is existing around them at that moment in time. Because there's so much energy that exists around us with form that we see or we cannot see, that is belonging to that particular time, that we must accept it, that it is within its own place, within its own existence.
Well, I had the flu, and it was very, very bad. It's the worst flu I've ever had. I just thought I was dying. And I was lying on the couch, and I was just sort of begging someone to help me, you know, because I just felt so ill. And I just looked at the end of the couch, and there was Pedro there. He was just sitting on the edge of the couch looking at me. And I looked into his eyes, and they were orange. And I spoke to him in my mind, and I just said, will it work, you know, because I felt the heat coming from his eyes into my eyes and just through my body. And I just felt this heat, you know, just going through. And I don't know how long it lasted, but an hour, 2 hours after that, you know, I was fine. The flu had left me.
Who knows exactly what other mysteries this ancient farmhouse harbours within its boundaries? The ruins of this once beautiful monastery have a tragic tale to tell. 800 years ago, a Franciscan monk, Brother Adam, fell in love with a nun, Sister Teresa. They clandestinely met outside the monastery walls each evening so as to be together. A local woodsman discovered their secret and threatened to tell the abbot. Rather than disgrace their orders, that evening the two made a suicide pact and hung themselves. This is not quite the end of the story, for often on moonlit nights in the ruins of the North Wing, two shadowy figures can be seen locked in an eternal embrace. This Tudor building has been a favourite watering hole for people to quench their thirsts for over 400 years. Ye Old Swan Tavern, which is currently run by Jeff and Dawn Bevan, is on most days a quiet pub where locals happily sup their beer. But landlord Jeff tells us of his first encounter with the supernatural, and it was not so quiet.
Well, the first thing I encountered was when we decorated the place. The chairs were on the tables. Well, we had stalls on tables at the time. And when I came down in the mornings, which was my turn to do the cleaning, they were on the floor. And there's no way that they could have been on the floor. They couldn't have fallen on the floor. And then the following day, I went to bed, as usual, and I had to get up in the middle of the night. And I thought my wife had the television on. And I thought, well, that's a bit of a funny time in the morning to put the telly on. Went into the bedroom, and she was still sound asleep. And it sounded like a party going on in this part of the pub. And I put my ear to the floor and heard all this laughing and singing and glasses and pewter pots, they sounded like, banging together, and it slowly faded away into the distance.
One night, Dawn was preparing the evening meals at the food bar when she suddenly noticed a woman looking at the menu. She began to tell the woman the food would not be ready for another hour, but the woman, who was dressed in a long grey dress, started to walk away. As Dawn watched, the temperature in the bar dropped, and the woman disappeared through the wall.
One evening back on a Tuesday evening, it was a lovely April evening, and I was standing at the door, wasn't a soul about anywhere, and as I looked up the street and back again, it was one of those evenings that you wish you were out walking, and I just got thrown straight out of the door onto the car park before it was made into a garden. And when I came back in to think someone was messing about, there wasn't no one there at all. And often customers have been pushed at the bar, and as I've turned round, there hasn't been anything there, and I've just laughed at them. Well, we've had various incidents in the bar area. A few weeks ago, one of the big jugs, heavy jugs, hanging up, just took off and floated through the bar in front of everybody on the Friday lunchtime and landed the right way up on the floor at the far end. And normally that doesn't happen. They usually shoot across, glasses fly out from under the bar. The coffee pot decides to fly over the bar, mainly at my wife for some unknown reason, because I think she's a non-believer, and it's trying to tell her something. The bread in the kitchen takes off from various times. I don't know why it's only the bread, whether it's because it's a thing that wouldn't really hurt anyone. It just needs to be made to be seen.
Seen here are the original deeds to this historic drinking house, dated 1728, and signed between John Martin and John Bunyan on May the 16th. Discovered in the cellar of the inn was a doorway, which, when opened, revealed a secret passage leading to the church. The passage is believed to have been used as an escape route for the monks during the Reformation. The wind was a torrent of darkness amongst the blasted trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor. The highwaymen came riding up to the old inn door. And to this particular inn, the highwayman was Dick Turpin. It was here that after a robbery, and with the revenue men hot on his trail, he shot his horse backwards and rode off into the snow, sending his pursuers in the wrong direction. Outside the Old Swan stands a large stone. It's said to be the stone that Dick would stand on to mount his horse. Legend has it that the stone carries a curse, and anyone who moves it will meet with a serious or fatal accident. One of the tavern's modern locals was recently dared to move the cursed rock, and lived to regret it after a terrible car crash that he was involved in a week later. Rumour has it that in this very room a revenue man met his death, when a highwayman, probably Turpin himself, who often bolted upstairs at any sign of the law, drew his pistol.
My daughter's seen a man walk through the walls upstairs, very, very plainly. In consequence, she doesn't like going to bed now on her own. There was a time when I saw a man sitting at the bottom of the stairs in a cloak, very plainly, and then he disappeared.
Most public houses of this time had very strict rules, but it is known that the landlord of the Swan during this period was very sympathetic towards rogues such as Turpin. In its time, the building has seen many changes. One feature that dates back to Turpin's time was a cheese room. Women would have to climb steps to a window set high in the wall, so the local gentry would not have to get off their horses to purchase cheese. Opposite the Swan is Turpin Close, named after Henry Turpin, the village rector of 1442, who was supposedly the witch-finder general of the time. Such a great deal of history in one small area. And to end the tale, the ghostly figure of Dick Turpin has been seen riding down Woughton's Berry Lane on his way to the Old Swan Inn. The Hollies is a large Victorian house that was originally owned by one family. It has, however, in recent years been turned into 8 separate flats. Clive and Hilary Presley, who own a flat on the ground floor, have had a mysterious visitor for some time now. It all started a year and a half ago when Clive Presley regularly heard from upstairs his front door opening. He would come down to see who could possibly be there, but the door was shut fast. A year later, Clive and his wife found themselves constantly being woken up in the early hours of the morning. They were woken by loud slaps on the wall downstairs, always the same wall. A medium and his wife, friends of the Presleys, were called to assist with the problem.
We got in contact, or rather Tony did, with a girl in spirit called Stella Wainwright, and we found out that she used to be a scullery maid in this particular house when it was a big Victorian house back 100 so years ago. She turned out to be 16 years old.
She didn't like the place. It was a big Victorian house at one point, and now it was knocked down for flats. And she found that it was too small, and she wanted to knock it down. And that's the reason why she used to hammer on the wall or knock on the wall, because she was trying in fact, to try and knock it down.
She was very badly treated by all accounts, she told us, to the point where she's neglected. And she decided that she'd had enough of this neglect. And then during the course of her lifetime, her short lifetime, she tried to get back at one or two by putting a little bit of poison or whatever in her tea, food or whatever. And they went a bit ill. It never killed anyone, just made them ill.
It was also discovered in one of the 3 meetings undertaken with the spiritualist medium that what provoked Stella to join the Presleys at the Hollies was the fact that she believed that Hilary was her mother reincarnated.
I was very shocked, very taken aback. I couldn't believe that it could have possibly happened. When I got over that, I began to realise how she was feeling and that she wanted to get in touch. And I felt that I was the one that was probably inviting her.
We asked the Presleys' spiritualist friends Tony and Betty Bedford to join us while we were filming. Upon entering the room, Tony told us that Stella was in the room with us, and she spoke through him.
I'm very pleased that you have helped me.
So have you actually gone over into spirit now?
Yes, but I can come back when I wish.
So are you happier now?
Oh yes, yes. So after 3 sittings here, we managed to her to accept that she was a spirit and that she would be going over and she would be received properly into the spirit world properly, and she would not come back now, only as a brief visit, but not to annoy anybody. And that's really how we came in. But the Spiritist Church movement is really to prove life after death, life after physical death that goes on.
When we do rescue work, I act as the other half, you might say, with him being the spirit and speaking what he hears the spirit saying, and then I talk to the spirit through him. Why did you bang the wall this evening?
I'm afraid I just did it what you call for a mischievous purpose.
But you're not going to do it again, are you?
No, I don't think so. I have got a brief flash of Stella sitting on the top of the stairs because I thought she looked like a boy. and I saw her in a room somewhere, but I can't remember exactly where it was, but it's only a very big sort of flash.
Although Stella visited us the night we filmed at the Hollies, the Presleys tell us that she is gradually making her way over to the spirit world, and they are very pleased to have helped her get there. We can only apologize for any loss of sound quality throughout this piece, but strangely a buzzing sound became a problem for our crew whilst filming at the Hollies, and even after the microphone receiver was switched off, the sound meters continued to peak. Let us now go back in time to the year 1502. King Henry VII was on the throne of England. His eldest son Arthur, who was Prince of Wales and 15 years old, was married in St. Paul's Cathedral to Catherine, who was 16 at the time. Catherine was the daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon. The marriage was to strengthen the union between England and Spain. Shortly after the wedding, the couple were moved by King Henry to Ludlow Castle. For being virtually the capital of Wales, it was considered the ideal place to govern the lawless countryside around them that couldn't be dealt with from London. Situated close to the castle stands Castle Lodge, a building steeped in history with many a ghostly tale to tell. Current owner Bill Pearson continues the story of Catherine and Arthur.
Well, 3 months passed. I suppose they were happily married and so on. Prince Arthur was just a child. And Queen Catherine, she was not much more than 15 or 16 years old, thereabouts. Well, Prince Arthur caught the sweating sickness, which is the plague, and in a few hours he died. So she was left a widow. But I'm told by, like legends of Ludlow, elderly people that have come and tried to tell me, although it's not in the history books, they say that Catherine came to this house because the plague was in the castle. I've looked in my records, because I have the records of this house going way back, and there was a widow living here by the name of Widow Halfpenny. So they say that Catherine loved this house.
The main part of the house was built by Thomas Sackford in 1572, who was responsible for looking after the prison, which was below the house. The dungeon where the prisoners were kept was reached by this now walled-up stairway. The west wing of the house dates much further back and is where Catherine would have stayed during her time at Castle Lodge.
Well, we'd been here about 6 months. We were doing work on the top floor. We've got 8 cats in this house, you see, although they've got their own place now. At the time, the cats lived on the top floor in a room, and the corridor was blocked off so they couldn't get out. So my wife came up the back stairs into that corridor, with tins of cat food in her hands, to walk across to the door, to open it for the cats, you see. And as she got to the corridor, she glanced to the left because something caught her eye, and there was a figure in there, a person. And she wondered how on earth they got up there, because there's no other way except our private back stairs. So she was going to sort of show them the way out. But it was a lady or a girl about 14, 15, 16 years old. But she was dressed in very beautiful Tudor costume. And my wife was so surprised, she backed up against the door, and the figure came through the doorway, swept past her, holding her skirts off her shoes, and swept quickly down the corridor, through the mesh, still remaining solid, and disappeared into the end room. So my wife sort of went into a bit of a shock then, because her mind was a bit shattered from what she'd seen.
This is the room from which Catherine was seen to appear by Bill's wife. It's a room that over the centuries has been used as a nursery. Castle Lodge itself is a warm building, but upon entering the room, the crew felt as if they had walked into a refrigerator, as the hairs stood up on the back of their necks.
Being open to the public every day, we have a lot of visitors, and every now and again, one of the visitors has an experience. Well, 2 months ago, a gentleman came in with his wife and 3 children and went up there, and they were up there a few minutes when the gentleman came rushing down the stairs, you see, and to the door, followed closely by his wife. And his wife said, "My husband's just seen something. It's a lady in a Tudor costume, and she disappeared." And I turned to the gentleman. I said, "Could you tell me what you saw exactly? Because I think you've seen Kate." He couldn't talk. He was in a sort of state of shock. He couldn't talk. He was sort of half crying, and he was in a really upset state. We had a couple of very elderly ladies in when we first opened up, and they said, "Have you sold the fireplace?" I said, "No, we can't sell anything." "Have you seen Kate?" I said, "Who's Kate?" "Catherine of Aragon. She walks on the top floor. We've seen her, you know." And then we heard the story of how people have seen Catherine of Aragon.
After the death of Prince Arthur, it was arranged by King Henry that Catherine would marry the second heir to the throne, Prince Henry, when he was of age. In 1509, Catherine of Aragon married Henry VIII when he was just 18 years old. During their marriage, Catherine bore 6 children, only one of whom survived, Mary, who would later become Bloody Mary, Queen of England. Because a son was never given to Henry, he decided that after almost 20 years of happy marriage, he wanted to divorce Catherine and marry Anne Boleyn in the hope that she would bear him a son. Queen Catherine was exiled from the court to Ampthill and is still remembered in the town today. She remained here until her death in January 1536. It was found that she had a black growth on her heart, and this was the cause of her death. But a rumor persists to this day that she was poisoned. Catherine stayed in the manor house of Ampthill Castle, with beautiful views of the surrounding Bedfordshire countryside. The only thing left of the site today is a memorial erected to Catherine in the 18th century and bearing this inscription: "In days of old, here Ampthill towers were seen, the mournful refuge of an injured queen. Here flowed her pure, unavailing tears. Here blinded zeal sustained her sinking years. Yet freedom hence her radiant banner waved, and love avenged a realm by priests enslaved. For Catherine's wrongs a nation's bliss was spread, and Luther's light from Henry's lawless bed." Catherine is remembered in Ampthill for the act of burning her lace so that there would be work for the women of the town. It seems that Catherine, although faithful to Henry until her dying day, has returned in spirit to Castle Lodge to recapture the sweet days of her youth with Prince Arthur in Ludlow. There has been a church on this site since the Norman Conquest. The present building was abandoned around 1830 for a larger church down the hill in the village. As it started to fall into disrepair, people began to see strange things. Witchcraft, Satanism, black magic, began to be associated with the by now ruined church. The old altar stone was said to be used for black magic rites and was seen by the locals as a place to keep away from after dark. Some said you could feel the presence of evil by just being there. Legend has it that a village originally surrounded the church, but a mysterious sickness left the survivors no option but to rebuild on the site where the village stands today. Many stories have become attached to this site over the years, and in the early 60s a grave was broken into and the skull and bones spread around the inside of the ruined church in an obvious black magic rite. A word of warning. If rumors are to be believed, there is a certain tombstone in this graveyard that, if stared at long enough, will pronounce the date of your death. So beware. George and William had always been friends. They had grown up together, and when war broke out in 1914, they both joined the Royal Flying Corps. George became an air mechanic and William a pilot. One day, as William's plane limped into view, George's blood ran cold. The plane hit the ground and burst into flames. George ran forward, oblivious of his own safety, his one thought, to save William. Only George returned home, and sadly died soon afterwards from injuries he sustained in his valiant rescue attempt. George is said to haunt this graveyard, and his ghostly figure can sometimes be seen restlessly moving from grave to grave, vainly searching for his friend's epitaph. Canals were once filled with working narrowboats, laden with industrial cargo. Things are very different now, but this stretch of the canal is the setting for our last and perhaps most poignant story.
Thomas Best chugged slowly into the small Bedfordshire town. This was his first trip. Formerly an agricultural worker, he'd been wooed upon the boats by the prospect of much larger wages. Thomas's thoughts turned to May, his woman of long standing, and 3 stubborn boys that she had borne him. They'd stayed behind in the small Nottinghamshire cottage that they rented, but soon he would probably bring them onto the boat to live and work beside him. Thomas turned his attention now to mooring the heavy narrowboat. But probably because his thoughts were still on fleeting images of his family, he jumped awkwardly onto the towpath, fell and twisted his ankle. The pain seared up his leg. He gritted his teeth, righted himself, and limped painfully on with his task. A soft female voice from behind him said, "Excuse me, sir, are you all right?" As much from the shock of being called sir, the discovery that somebody had witnessed his fall, Thomas wheeled round to be confronted by the concerned brown eyes and pale face of a young woman. This sudden action made him stagger back on his injured foot, releasing the pain again. Small, pale hands reached out and steadied him. "You lean on me, sir. My father keeps the public house on the bridge. You'll soon have your foot bandaged. A pint of ale will make the pain bearable." Soon a bemused Thomas was supping his ale, whilst the pale, capable hands of Grace, for that was the young woman's name, bandaged his injured foot. Thomas was a big, tough man, hardened by years of rough work and hard living. But as he watched Grace tending him, And as he listened intently as she told of her love for the canal, how she liked to paint pictures of narrow boats and canal people, he felt his heart begin to melt. Grace had married friends called Meg and John who lived nearby. They let her use their cellar where she was able to paint, far from the hustle and bustle of the busy canal-side public house. It was here that Grace brought Thomas that evening to show him her paintings before he went back to the narrowboat. Thomas could not remove Grace from his mind. At every trip, he visited that busy canal-side public house. Inevitably, a passionate and intense love affair ensued. And Thomas, frightened that he would lose his newfound happiness, kept his Nottinghamshire family a well-guarded secret. Grace, however, began to beg Thomas to leave the canal, and her father, realizing the depth of his daughter's feeling for Thomas, offered him a place in the public house. Thomas, whose wife May had begun to question him about why he was not trying to save money by having the family aboard the narrowboat, felt he was being torn apart. He had never loved anyone as much as he loved Grace. The responsibility he felt towards May and the boys weighed heavily upon him. Eventually, Thomas knew he would have to make a hard-to-end decision, as clandestine lovers often do. Not brave enough to tell Grace the truth, he concocted the story of an extremely ill mother. He would have to care for her for the time she had remaining, he said. He begged Grace to wait for him, as he would be back. Then, leaving a sobbing Grace upon the towpath, he returned to his Nottinghamshire family, came off the boats, and sorrowfully returned to the life of an agricultural worker. That could have been the end of this sad love story. But 2 years later, Thomas came chugging back up the canal. Sadly, his wife May had died of consumption. The boys now lived with an aunt, and Thomas had gone back to the canal. His heart was light as he neared that little Bedfordshire town. Soon he would see Grace again. How he prayed she hadn't got married in the meantime, that she still loved him as he loved her. As he moored the boat, his thoughts went to the first time he met Grace, and thoughts of her brown eyes washed warmly over him. Suddenly he thought he heard Grace call him. And looking up, sure enough, in the twilight he dimly saw the figure of Grace. He shouted to her, then turned back to securing the boat. His task finished, his eager eyes looked up again, but Grace had vanished. Thomas, confused, rushed up to the public house, but was amazed to find it shuttered in darkness. So to the cellar he went. He was confident he'd find her there, waiting for him. But it was Meg who let him in. Yes, Grace had waited for him. Every day she had gone to the canal to watch to see if his boat would chug around the bend. And tragically, one night her father realized she hadn't returned. He ran down to the canal, he ran up and down the canal bank shouting her name, but to no avail. In the morning, boatmen found her frail, small body floating face down in the murky water. She must have slipped, people said. Her father closed the public house, left the district a broken man. Thomas listened in numb silence. It was then that he noticed the painted hearts upon the wall of that little cellar. One whole, one broken and bleeding. Heartbroken Thomas couldn't believe that Grace was dead, but I saw her tonight on the towpath, he told Meg. Meg was not surprised. And to this day, especially at twilight, Grace can often be seen on the towpath by the bridge, small and pale, her eyes fixed upon the canal, watching and waiting for a lover's return.
Now do you believe?